And we're joined by two guests this afternoon. Dr. Raywat Deonandan is an epidemiologist and an associate professor in the Department of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa. Good afternoon, Dr. Deonandan.
Good afternoon.
And Dr. Julie Bettinger is an associate professor in pediatrics at the Vaccine Evaluation Center at BC Children's Hospital. Dr. Bettinger, good afternoon to you.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks very much for joining us. Dr. Deonandan, to you first. How significant is this announcement, this deal with Pfizer and Moderna for millions of doses, the government says, of a potential vaccine?
It's pretty significant. It means that if those vaccines pan out, as I think they probably will, we will have dibs essentially on accessing them. We don't have, dibs, to use that word again, on the other candidates, like the Oxford candidate, which is also a very good vaccine. And I was initially quite concerned that Canadians would not be in line to get that one. But it looks like at least we're in the lineup to get one leading candidate. So by next year, most Canadians should have access to it.
By next year. What makes you so optimistic?
I'm an optimist by nature, but I think, the rumors around the phase 2 results are positive. The phase 3 results obviously are going to come in the next few weeks or months. But if it's anything as good as the other candidates, like the Oxford candidate, then I think it's going to be compelling. And I have faith. Faith is a bad word here, but I do have faith in the biopharma sector to mass produce at scale at an alarming rate. This is a priority across the entire sector globally, and everybody understands that the rate-limiting step is manufacture and distribution, so everyone's pulling out the plugs to make those as less of a barrier as possible. Now, it's conceivable to have a vaccine candidate on the market by the end of the year, but it's not conceivable to have it in the hands of physicians in Canada before, say, next spring. That takes a political effort of distribution, manufacturing, and other kinds of administrative efforts.
It really does seem like there is so much focus, like the entire scientific community has shifted focus onto COVID-19 research. And Dr. Bettinger, with that though, we still get this warning from Dr. Theresa Tam, tempering expectations, saying regardless of whether there's a vaccine or not, we may still have to continue with these physical distancing measures. It's not going to change everything.
No, I think that's true, and I think I'm maybe not as optimistic about when the vaccine will arrive or that we'll have a supply for everyone immediately. So what I would envision happening is we'll probably be prioritizing who receives the vaccine first, and it's not going to go to everyone at first. And so for sure, until we have a high enough proportion of the population vaccinated, all of the physical distancing measures and everything else that we're doing right now will still need to stay in place. I think what the Angus Reid study also highlighted is that we do have a significant proportion of the population that is somewhat concerned about a new vaccine. And this isn't unexpected. We see this frequently with new vaccines, and I think that the questions that people are raising are common and understandable. But, if we can't allay their fears about the vaccines and people decide not to take it, then the vaccine will not work, and we won't get the community protection that we're hoping to get from a vaccine. And
what is behind that vaccine hesitancy? It's the respondents to the Angus Reid poll. 76% said they were worried about side effects. Are there legitimate concerns there, given the speed with which this is all happening?
Well, so I think vaccine safety is always a concern for people who are hesitant. It's often the number one concern, and we hear this. It's not an uncommon concern to be raised around any new vaccine that we have. I think in the context of the COVID-19 vaccines, it's a bit unfounded, and I think some of the language that we're using around the process, Operation Warp Speed, that's not helping people have confidence in the process.
That's in the U.S.
Yeah, that's in the U.S. exactly, and I think so that what people need to realize is we have our own processes in Canada that every vaccine has to go through. It's going to be no different for the COVID-19 vaccines. There are regulatory processes in place. The evidence has to be presented. We have to see the safety data. We have to see the efficacy data. We have to understand that the vaccines will actually work before they're ever going to be used in the population. And those steps are still going to be taken, even though we have the entire scientific and vaccine community focusing on getting a product out. They're not going to be shortcutting the steps that need to be done.
Dr. Deonandan, can you take us through those steps, to ensure that a vaccine is safe and effective?
Well, the phases of clinical trials have to be understood, first of all. So the first phase, phase 1, tends to be establishing what the appropriate dose is. A small number of people is tested on for that. Second phase is what we have the data from the Oxford trial and the CanSino trials. That's where we establish whether or not the vaccine actually produces antibodies and T cells in the majority of respondents. Phase 3 is what we really care about and are excited by. So phase 3 is when we deploy the vaccine to tens of thousands of people in COVID-intense parts of the world and see if they have a lesser problematic response than people who do not receive the vaccine. So in phase 3, that's when we'll see who responds well to it, who responds poorly, and whether or not the vaccine actually does confer protection. Right now, the phase 2 data only tells us if we produce antibodies, which is not the same as preventing infection or preventing serious disease, even though it probably is. So that's the first thing. The phase 3 data has to be compelling, has to show safety, so the side effects have to be very small and not serious, and has to show that safety in a wide variety of people and understanding which underlying conditions, which types of patients are going to have the ones are going to have problematic experiences. Then, of course, you've got the challenges of manufacture and distribution. And those aren't small challenges. So with this global emergency, some manufacturers have already started churning out doses in anticipation of being validated. And we have partnerships being struck around the world for a large-scale manufacturer of the Oxford dose, for example. Distribution is another issue entirely. If it's refrigeratable, that poses a challenge. If it can be stored in room temperature, that makes things a bit easier. There's a global shortage of glass, believe it or not. So shipping glass vials could get a little expensive. Canada has purchased 30 million syringes and swabs and Band-Aids in anticipation for when the vaccine arrives so that everyone can, in theory, get a shot. So the science poses one set of barriers, but the administration and logistics pose the second set. And I'm thankful that the second set of challenges are being addressed now in anticipation that the first set will be addressed by science.
Let's take a call. We are taking your questions. What do you want to know about the search for a COVID-19 vaccine? We have two experts here standing by to take your questions. 1-800-825-5950. Metro Vancouver's number is 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, star or pound 690. Wayne is calling us from Fort St. John. Wayne, go ahead. What's your question, please?
I'm just wondering if the vaccine program is going to be run, Trudeau's going to run it the way he's run the WE program. And I'm also kind of wondering, why not just allow for herd immunity based on however many people are getting it, and the death rate seems pretty low. Thanks. Bye.
Wayne, thank you for the call. I'll get you to answer that the second part of his question. I guess what he's saying is, do we actually need a vaccine? Dr. Deonandan?
Oh, sure. The herd immunity approach is not advisable. First of all, we think fewer than 5% of Canadians have already been exposed, which means the vast majority are still susceptible. In New York City, about 20% have been exposed based upon seroprevalence studies, and they went through hell to get there. So to get a threshold of infection that constitutes herd immunity, we'd have to go through multiple levels of New York-style hell to get there. And even those who recover are having long-term morbidity issues. It's an unpleasant experience to go through. Why put ourselves through it when a vaccine offers artificial herd immunity? That's the goal. It's safer. No one's going to die, hopefully. I mean, if anyone does, it'll be a much smaller number, and I don't anticipate anybody will. The side effects seem to be quite minimal so far. So we want artificial herd immunity through the vaccine, not natural herd immunity through infection. That's a torturous, hellacious way to go.
And can you comment on what he said there about the fatality rate?
So we're talking here about what's called the infection fatality rate, the IFR. And right now we think globally it's going to be between 0.5 and 1% of infected people will die of it, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's an enormous number. The worst season of the flu gives us an IFR of about 0.1%. So this is, at best estimates, 2, 3, 4, 5 times worse than the flu. And if you don't die from it, you're going to have horrible morbidity experiences, long-term disability experiences. So looking at the death rate alone, it's a horrible disease, but that only tells a portion of the story. I think this narrative that this is not a serious concern is troubling to me because people look at small numbers and assume that that's their personal risk, which is true. But when it's scaled up to a population level, the risk of suffering at a population level is quite high.
And when our caller Wayne there talked about, is the government going to run this the way the We program was run? The question out of that may be, given the controversies around the We charity running the student grant program, is there a concern about transparency when it comes to how governments are approaching vaccine research and these vaccine agreements?
I'll take that. Transparency is key to all this. We have what's called a vaccine task force in Canada, and I'm not sure who's on it, what their mandate is, and I'm sure I could look it up and find it, but it's not as transparent as it could be. So one of the things we learned from SARS-1 is transparency in how we manage a pandemic is essential, and many countries around the world have been not that transparent in terms of sharing their data, their policies, or indeed everything they know about what's going on with their disease in their countries. So we can do better. And I hope I make a call out to politicians across the country when the vaccine arrives, make your process as visible and as transparent as possible. That's the best way to buy in public trust and buy-in.
Dr. Raywat Deonandan is with me, epidemiologist and associate professor in the Department of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa, as well as Dr. Julie Bettinger, associate professor in pediatrics at the Vaccine Evaluation Center at BC Children's Hospital, taking your questions on the search for a COVID-19 vaccine. Our next caller now is Lori, joining us from Port Moody. Hi, Lori. Hi there, Lori. I think we have lost our connection with Lori. We have an email from Donna who wants to know what is known about the longevity of protection after either having had COVID-19 or from vaccines for it. Donna, thank you very much. Dr. Bettinger, is that something that you've looked at?
Well, sure, I can answer, and then maybe Dr. Deonandan would want to add to it. I think in terms of the vaccines, we don't know. The short answer is we don't know, and we won't know until we have a viable vaccine candidate that we can use, and we're actually able to test it in a setting where disease is happening, and we can also measure, how long the antibodies last afterwards. I think the other issue in terms of the duration of protection from infection, we also don't know. I think we're getting some sense of that from what's been happening around the world, but I haven't seen anything that really clearly identifies that yet.
Is there a sense of how long you may be immune for, Dr. Deonandan, from your perspective?
So we have to draw a distinction between artificial immunity and natural immunity. So the natural immunity comes about from infection and recovery. And so far it looks like most people develop antibodies a couple of weeks after first exposure, and those antibodies seem to last at least a month, possibly two. With the vaccine data we have for at least a couple of candidates, the CanSino and Oxford one, it seems that antibody presence lingers for a couple of months, and it's prolonged if there's a booster shot. And more importantly, it seems to trigger T-cell response, which is another arm of the immune system, and that offers a more lasting immunity, we hope, we think. Again, we won't know for certain, as was stated, until the phase 3 trials are done, but every indication so far is that because of the T-cell stimulation, it may offer protection for possibly years. But I think that's overly optimistic. I would say possibly a season. That's the goal. Kind of like a flu vaccine, protection for a season so that we get it again next season, kind of like the flu vaccine again.
Lori is back with us now from Port Moody. Hi, Lori. Go ahead, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. My question is about this new kind of vaccine. We hear talk about it being RNA or DNA based. Exactly how does that work? Does it affect our own DNA? And as a secondary question to that, I've heard about cell line, germ line material. Is any of that coming from fetal tissue? And where can we look to find out that information?
Okay, some very specific questions there, Lori. Thank you very much. Who would like to take that?
Well, I'll take a shot at the mRNA aspects of it. The fetal tissue aspects, I have no idea. But we have a variety of technologies being deployed to develop vaccines right now, which makes it so exciting. One of the reasons we're able to produce vaccine candidates at warp speed, to use that term, is because we have new technologies. So the two of the more exciting ones, let's back up for a second. Traditionally, in making vaccines, you could inject someone with a live virus and maybe risk infecting them. So that was done long ago. Then we started injecting people with, dead viruses, and that gave your immune system some practice. Then we started injecting people with fragments of the virus, and that has zero potential to infect you, but it gives your immune system target practice. The two new technologies being used, one is the mRNA approach, and that is what the Pfizer and Mrna approach takes. And it inserts a piece of genetic material into your cell's DNA so that you produce a protein that then your immune system has target practice on. It's very, very safe as far as I can see. So, is your genome being rewritten? Possibly in a minor way, but the human genome is already made up of a substantial amount of viral DNA because over history we've been infected by so many viruses that a big portion of our genome is in fact non-human. The other technology, one used by Oxford and CanSino, is what's called a viral vector. So they use another virus. Oxford uses a chimp cold virus to deliver a little portion of the COVID fragment into your cell that gives, again, target practice for your immune system. Also very, very safe because the chimp cold virus won't infect you. So all these different approaches, I suppose the concern is if they're messing with your DNA, what is the long-term germline aspects of it? And the evidence suggests none. There's no long-term germline, negative side effects, again, considering so much of the human genome already contains viral DNA going back millions of years.
And you said you didn't know about that second part of her question. Dr. Bettinger, I just want to ask you, where should people, it sounds like she's done some reading and come across these concerns. Where would you suggest people go to find out, responses to their concerns or answers to what they may be wondering about when it comes to a vaccine?
Yeah, no, I think the question's great, and I don't know the answer to it either, particularly around the COVID-19 vaccines that are being developed. But I think, again, I'll just come back to the point of transparency. I think the more that the manufacturers and the scientists who are working on these can be transparent with their information, the easier it is going to be for people like us who come on to try to answer these questions, as well as the general public, to understand what's going on. And I think it's great to hear these questions because then, as well, we know what people are asking and can try to find this out.
Lori, thank you very much for that call. I'm glad we got you back on. Steve is joining us now from Kelowna. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Hi, what's your question about the COVID-19 vaccine and the search for it?
Well, not so much a question. I'm a retired epidemiologist, have done a bit of research on vaccines over the years, and a couple of your guests have already made the comment about the importance of transparency, and I just wanted to reinforce that. I think before people are going to be comfortable taking a vaccine, they're going to want to know a lot more information than the public health authorities have been giving us so far. So shows like this are important. I want to know what the antigen is in the vaccine. That's the viral component of which immunity is directed against. I want to know what the adjuvant is. Has that adjuvant been previously used in commercially available vaccines? Does the vaccine stimulate both cellular immunity and humoral immunity? One of your guests mentioned T-cell immunity a few minutes ago. Are there other vaccines coming in addition to the one that's first presented? And what are those vaccines and how do they compare? And a final comment, I think the age range of people used in phase 3 trials is important. I'm 75 years old now and I can't get certain influenza vaccines because the trials that were done stopped at age 65. So there's a whole variety of issues here that I think the vaccine manufacturers should be putting that information out so people can digest it and ask the experts all kinds of questions about it.
Really good question, Steve. Thank you very much. My goodness, a lot there. Maybe I'll start with the last point he made about the age range. This is something that we've heard when it comes to these trials that we're seeing right now. How concerning is that, access for the older population? Dr. Bettinger, do you want to take that?
Sure, I'll take that one. So I think that's an excellent point. The other thing we know, as individuals age, the immune system does something called immunosenescence, which is where it actually doesn't work as well as it did when you were younger. And a lot of our vaccines that work perfectly fine in someone who's 40 years of age and healthy don't work at all when you hit 75, 80 years of age. given who's at highest risk for death from COVID-19, we really need to know the answer as to whether or not the vaccines we're producing are going to work in that higher age group, because if they don't, then some of the other strategies that Dr. Tam talked about are going to still need to be in place to protect that cohort of individuals. So I completely agree that, we need to be looking at this and we need to have an understanding of this. I think a lot of that will not come until the phase 3 studies, and it can't come really until the phase 3 studies, because we first need to make sure we've got a vaccine that's going to work in someone who's young and healthy, because if it doesn't even work in that group, there's no point in moving it into the other groups where we think they may not respond as well. So once we have that, more likely in the latter phase 3 trials, then we can start looking at those age groups, and I'm hoping that people are doing that.
Another question that struck me from Steve's many good questions was the one about would there be other vaccines coming down the line? And Dr. Deonandan, do you see that happening? We see kind of a first one and then perhaps another one that might improve on it, perhaps in the coming years or subsequent?
Unprecedented times. There are at least 150 vaccine candidates being explored around the world right now, and several more popping up in labs every day. So we're only hearing about the ones that are the leading candidates in terms of having data back, and therefore they've got the big money behind them, the Pfizers and the AstraZenecas, who are willing to back the production in deeper phase, because phase 3 trials are expensive, so someone's got to pay for those trials. But yeah, we're going to have an enormous flotilla of candidates within the next year. India has one called Covaxin, which is entering phase 3 trials as well. It doesn't make the news as much, and their government has already committed to reducing it to market by the fall. That's a bit of an ambitious schedule, I think. So it's important, I think, for Canadians to have access to a variety of candidates. When I mean Canadians, I mean Canadian physicians, to choose which one is best for their patients. And hopefully within a year or two, we'll have an entire pantheon of choices to target the specific needs of a patient. More options, the better. More tools in the toolbox, the better.
Thank you so much to both of you. So great to have you on the program. Thanks for taking these questions.
Great.
Thank you.
Take care. Dr. Raywat Deonandan, an epidemiologist and an associate professor in the Department of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa. And Dr. Julie Bettinger is an associate professor in pediatrics at the Vaccine Evaluation Center at BC Children's Hospital.